Hi everyone, I've just been playing this game. It's Autumn for Barbarossa. It's a SCS game published by MMP, and this is a magazine game as part of their Special Ops magazine. So first up, you're going to need a set of rules, of the series rules. You can download this, or I have a copy of the rules from another game in the series. The way the game works is that there are series rules, which is this rulebook, and then there may be another rulebook specific to the game. The rules for this game are very straightforward and very light. For example, the player turn is movement, then combat, then exploitation, which is basically only specific units can do it. It enables them to move again and maybe do overruns. Supply, and then you go to the second player turn. It's very straightforward. There are a huge number of stats on the counters, so attack strength, defense strength, and movement allowance. Zones of control, very straightforward. If you play war games, you'll be familiar with that. And then the rulebook goes through each rule in turn, gives you good examples. Here's an example of overrun, and all through the different combat. Yeah, very straightforward. So in total is about 7 pages of rules. The last page is designer notes. It's well written. Obviously the advantage is that we're up to v1.8 with this version. There may be a v1.9. So it's been through, iteration after iteration. Then the rules for, in addition, for this particular game, so Autumn for Barbarossa, so you'll need that standard combat series rules, and then the rules specific to the game that come in the magazine. Not a huge number of pages of rules, all made a lot of sense to me. Didn't have any problems with any of these. Interesting things for this game: airstrikes. You can use those against the enemy counters. Garrison units. So garrison units is when you take control of a key location. You can take a step loss and put a garrison unit on that location. There is a special rule around the Hitler withdrawal, which starts on turn 6, which is quite interesting. How to gain victory points, and so forth. And then you have, there's all the victory points on the map. There are a lot of victory locations. Then you've got a complete setup details. It shows you what counters to place on what hexes. As with a lot of games at this sort of scale, it does take a little time to set up. Not a huge amount of time compared to other games in the series, but it's half an hour or something to set the game up. So you go through the Soviets and then the Germans, and then you get all the reinforcements as well per turn. Combat tables. So the combat table and terrain table is specific to this game. On the combat table here, if we have a quick look, for example, on a 1-to-1 with a roll of 7, 2d6, attack 1, defense 1. So each one of those will take a step loss. If we compare that to, say, to a 4-to-1 on a 7, the defenders are going to take 2 step losses and a retreat of 2. So the game is an odds-based system, as you'd expect. It's a very straightforward way of, in this game system, it's very straightforward to calculate the odds. Interestingly, there are the terrain effects. There are different terrain effects for the Soviets as to the Germans. From memory reading and the rules, that was because of the type of vehicles, and maybe the German vehicles weren't as well suited to the environment as the as the Soviet ones were. So there are specific tables to those. So overall, the rules are very straightforward. As I said, this is a lighter game. It plays pretty fast, and there are a huge number of rules. There are a huge number of chrome. There's a few, as I said, around the airstrikes and around that withdrawal on turn 6. But yeah, well written. I had no problems with these at all. This isn't the first game in the Standard Combat series I've played, far from it. I've got a lot of games in the series, and it's a series that I enjoy because of its because of it's more straightforward. It's a lower weight game. And if we have a look at the map, the map's not huge, which means you don't need, on the advantage, you don't need a huge amount of table desk space to play the game. This is under Plexi. There are a huge number of counters either compared to a lot of games, both in this series and at this scale, which makes it a more of a, I'll describe it more of a longer evening game. It's not, it's longer than 2 hours, but neither is it a 6 hour sort of game. There are 10 turns. You can't quite see it, but on the side there's a turn track. You also have the terrain key as well. The map art is very nice. It's very clear to me what the contents of all the hexes are. The same with the counters. There's not a huge number of details on the counters anyway. You've only got 3 stats: the attack, the defense, and the movement rate. Plus, you've got in particular insignias and information for the counters, knowing where to set them up on the hexes on the map. What I like about this game series really is that it is very straightforward game to play. You move. Movement is very straightforward. You attack. You work out what the attack value is from your stack or a few counters. This is not a mega stacking game. You're only stacking sort of 3 counters at most, I'll say. You compare that to the defense. That gives you the odds. You look at the odd table, you roll 2d dice, take into effect any of the terrain. The terrain will shift the odds over in balance, in favour of the defender. It's very straightforward, which basically means you can focus on the strategy for you as a player rather than continually thumbing through the rules. This is a game that I would say once you've read through the rules a couple of times, how to go at trying the combat and the movement, you very rarely have to refer back to the rules. You're only really referring to the 2 tables, which is the terrain and the combat table, and then for the reinforcements. Some concluding thoughts. The way this game plays is pretty straightforward. There aren't any rules specific to this particular game in the series that I struggled with. They all made a lot of sense. I actually think for the Standard Combat series, this is a really good introduction to that series of games. By and large, the German player, who's going to be mostly set up on the left-hand side of the map here, is and against the Soviet defense. The Germans are going to push through those, and the German player you want to push through quite aggressively, and then the Soviet reinforcements are going to come from the right-hand side of the map there, and then the Germans are going to have a much harder time of it, especially after turn 6, when you're going to have to take some of those German counters off the table. So it's got a nice flavour. It's got a nice narrative to it that feels historical enough without huge amounts of chrome and detail, I would say. And the fact you can play it comfortably in a long evening or a sort of a slower afternoon or something like that is great. The map, as I said, is really nice. It's not huge, so you don't need a huge amount of space. There's not a huge amount of counters. There aren't huge stacks in this game. And don't get me wrong, I love games with large maps and stacks, but it makes the game very straightforward to play. And a good pace. It's got a good pace, I think the game has, which is great, and a good sense of movement. And it's not like I found playing this particular scenario, because of the historical scenario that it is, as I said, there's a good narrative. The Germans are going to push quite successfully fairly early on, and then they will encounter a lot of resistance from the Soviet player. You can play it solo quite comfortably, playing both sides, no problem. There is no solo mode, there is no AI or anything like that. But if you're used to playing these types of games two-handed, because of the streamlined mechanics of the game, it solos quite well. It is an enjoyable solo experience. Overall, I think if you're familiar with the Standard Combat series, I think this is a great addition. If you're not familiar, but you're interested in this series of games, I think this is a great starting point. It's more straightforward to set up. The rules all make a lot of sense. Some of them, I would go on a limb and say, some of the games maybe in the Standard Combat series occasionally have a few rules that make me scratch my head as to what the intent is. But this is pretty straightforward and made sense to me. Yeah, it's a very enjoyable, brisky Eastern Front game that you can play quite comfortably. Yeah, so top stuff, and thanks for watching.